But first, it's telling, isn't it, that it only took a single day or so for reality to crash in on the government's energy roadmap. Yesterday, Energy Minister Angus Taylor announced an $18 billion plan to cut emissions while keeping energy prices down. Today, there's yet another cloud over the future of the Portland aluminium smelter, which is critical to Australia's manufacturing capability and more than 1,000 direct and indirect Victorian jobs, all because power prices aren't low enough to keep it viable. Indeed, the smelter is only still operating because Victorian taxpayers have handed over $200 million over the past 4 years to subsidise its power. That's around $50,000 per job per year from the taxpayer. And it's a cost every Victorian has had to bear in order to maintain the charade that we could have more and more wind and solar power and less coal-fired baseload power and still be a country that makes things. Sadly, this is the brutal reality of the whole green power charade. And frankly, there's nothing in the energy roadmap released yesterday that offers any real hope that we'll get back to a rational energy system that's focused on producing affordable and reliable power rather than reducing just emissions anytime soon. The so-called roadmap is all about throwing money at emerging low emissions technologies that might, I repeat, might eventually work. But in the meantime, of course, relatively cheap 24/7 coal-fired power is exiting the system, and it's being replaced by wind and solar that's only cheap when the wind blows and the sun shines. And it has to be firmed up or backed up, as we know, because the power has to be on all the time, not just on windy days or in daylight hours. And that's the essential problem that our emissions obsession has created. Australia was once a great place to make aluminium when there was an abundance of cheap coal-fired electrical power, but it's now a very bad place to make aluminium, or indeed anything that requires much electricity, because climate activism has contaminated the power market. It's 7 years now since the coalition was elected in Canberra, promising to end Labor's obsession and not to put cutting emissions ahead of protecting jobs and preserving Australia's prosperity. Back then, as far as the coalition was concerned, the best way to reduce emissions was to plant more trees, improve soil carbon, and encourage energy efficiency by consumers. It wasn't to play games with the actual production of energy. Because given our abundance in coal, gas and uranium, Australia should always have been an affordable energy superpower. Even the Finkel report has confirmed that despite the huge capital cost of coal-fired power stations, coal is still the cheapest form of power by a considerable margin. Indeed, renewable energy only becomes cheaper by 2050, and then only if battery technology improves. Yet just as woke shareholder activism is pushing big companies like Rio to get out of emissions-intensive aluminium production, the same woke shareholder activism, plus all the consumer subsidies, is pushing power companies like AGL to replace baseload power with intermittent wind and solar. And much of the hardware, of course, with both of those, wind and solar, is made in China, as we know. And in the case of wind, 70% of Australia's wind farms are foreign-owned, I might add. Indeed, let's see this for what it is. Because baseload power requires massive investment, keeps power prices down and attracts no subsidies. That's why companies like AGL have absolutely no interest in providing it. The total failure of the market to provide any new large-scale baseload power over the past decade is no mystery. The market's been rigged against it. Ever since Labor massively expanded the renewable energy targets under Kevin Rudd, but the coalition has been unable to unwind because any reductions get blocked in the Senate. That's why the Morrison government has had to promise that the government-owned Snowy Hydro would build the extra 1,000 megawatts of baseload power required to keep open another aluminium plant at Tomago in New South Wales if the private sector won't do it. And it's good that the government is finally ready to take a direct role in Australia's electricity supply. It's an essential service, we know that. and government must step in the event of market failure. What no one in the government is prepared to explain, though, is why the new baseload power plant has to use gas, despite being in the middle of one of the world's largest thermal coal fields, and why we're still exporting record tonnages of thermal coal to produce cheap power in every other country, but not here at home.